Shalom and welcome to NeshamaCast, exploring Jewish spiritual care today, brought to you by Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains. I'm your host, Rabbi Ed Bernstein. Welcome to the second season of NeshamaCast. Over the course of the first season, we met a diverse group of professional chaplains who are members of Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains, and serve in a wide variety of professional settings. Check out our feed to access all prior episodes. In this new season of NeshamaCast, we will continue to meet members of NAJC who provide Jewish spiritual care in a variety of environments. While many NAJC members serve in institutions devoted to physical and mental health, our members serve in other contexts as well to provide needed spiritual support. As we record in August 2024, a new school year is about to begin, so today's program will feature 3 NAJC members who provide chaplaincy on university campuses. Since the terror attacks in Israel on October 7, 2023, and the war that ensued, American university campuses have been fraught with tension over the Middle East conflict, and Jewish students have turned to chaplains on campus for support and guidance. NeshamaCast contributor Rabbi Katya Philo is herself a university campus chaplain, and she will moderate the conversation with our 2 additional guests. So let me turn it over now to Rabbi Katya Philo to guide us through the rest of the program.
Thank you, Ed. And yes, I'm particularly grateful for today's conversation with our guests here because I recently started working as a Jewish chaplain at Fordham University in New York City. And we're recording this episode on the eve of Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, and it just felt particularly poignant to me today, and maybe we'll come back to that later. The last year has been extraordinarily complex and stressful for the Jewish community as a whole, and perhaps even more so for Jewish chaplains working on campuses across the United States. First, of course, there was the shock of October 7 itself, the gutting horrors of the day, the worrying about friends and loved ones, the vigils and prayers. And this was followed by the war in Gaza and the wider conflict that's widening out now from Lebanon, now also Yemen and Iran maybe. And then campus protests broke out on so many, but no means all campuses. And reactions ranged from lecture series on Israel-Palestine, from teachings, peaceful dissent, to angry anti- or pro-Israel demonstrations, from prayers for the hostages and activism on behalf of Gazans. There were bloody clashes with the police, damaged buildings, all of this amplified by social media and TV screens. There's been a rise of anti-Semitism and bias incidents, with varying levels of tensions among different campuses. And there's also been a rise in Islamophobia and anti-Arab violence. As in wider society, the Jewish community on our campuses is often divided. Some are leaning into support of Israel's war efforts, others in opposition. Many find themselves somewhere in between. Many Jewish students have turned to Hillel as a space of refuge and comfort and support. Others, shocked into activism by the images of suffering and death coming out of Gaza, felt that their place was with the victims of the Israeli military. And today, many of our students and their parents, but also staff and faculty, feel hurt, angry, and scared. Many express a new sense of unease and discomfort. So when we talk about Israel and Gaza on campuses, there were and are so many issues at play. And as chaplains, we navigate not only our own feelings on these subjects, but also what our students, faculty, and staff do or do not need at any given moment. Now in August, as we ready ourselves to return to campus for a new academic year, what can we learn from the past year? How can we best serve our communities? What does it mean to be a campus chaplain today? We're proud to bring you today 2 campus chaplains, Hagar ben Eliezer and Rabbi Drew Kaplan. Chaplain Hagar ben Eliezer is a chaplain and wellness therapist for Hillel at UC Berkeley. This summer, Hagar served as the Hillel Birthright International Grief and Trauma Specialist in Israel. Chaplain Hagar is active in NAJC and serves on the board as well as co-chairs the conference committee and leads the fundraising committee. She's also a mentor to chaplains preparing for certification. Rabbi Drew Kaplan currently serves as the campus rabbi for Cincinnati Hillel. Before that, he served as the rabbi and director working on behalf of institutions addressing the needs of young people, such as the Jewish Student Services and Jewish Young Adult Enrichment, as well as Long Beach Hillel, all in Southern California. He's the chair of social media at NIJC. Chaplain Hagar and Rabbi Drew, welcome to NeshamaCast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we delve into our conversation, I would like to ask both of you to talk briefly about your spiritual and religious backstory. What was your spiritual life like growing up? What was the path that led you to the rabbinate or into chaplaincy and campus work in particular? Chaplain Hagar, would you like to get us started?
Sure. I love that question. I always think it's interesting to ask chaplains where they came from and how they got to where they are. You know, I grew up in a really unique family in that my father was born in Baghdad and immigrated to Israel and was one of the folks who helped Israel become a state. I grew up on the stories of Zionism, I always say. My mom, she converted to Orthodox. We were at Chabad until I was about 10. My dad took over a Sephardic shul. He's a rabbi. So I grew up in this like really kind of scheduled Judaism. Like we had our Friday night, our Saturday at Hebrew school, 2 days a week at Hebrew school, Hebrew day school. And I thought everyone lived that way, but I didn't realize until I was older that my parents had created this beautiful bubble. And so it made sense for me to really go into working in the Jewish community and the Jewish world. And having worked in synagogues for about 10 years, 12 years, you know, it's very expected in my family to become a rabbi. My dad was a rabbi, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and everyone's like, well, that's natural what you're going to do. I remember working in synagogues, looking up at the pulpit going, they're just not close enough. They're just not close enough to the people. And I knew I wanted to do something that was next to people, not above them or below them. And I did my own research. I was looking at spiritual direction. And then I learned about chaplaincy and I sat with it for about 2 years and then said, yeah, this is the thing I want to do. I'd become a therapist. I was working for a Jewish domestic violence agency, supporting clients through that. And then I started my chaplaincy. And lo and behold, the pandemic came. And so chaplaincy in the hospital during that time was a really unique and hard and beautiful experience. And I really I think from the moment I started chaplaincy, I felt like I was in my right place. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and that I was hearing my spiritual connection and my connection to God so much clearer when I was doing the work of chaplaincy. And so, yeah, after some years of hardship in the hospital, working during COVID, working in an ICU COVID unit, I kind of burnt out and said, I want to do something out of the hospital. And a friend of mine had told me about the job on the university campus. I'd been a professor for 8 years in my past life, and I thought, oh, I know college kids, this will be fun. And that's how I landed where I am. I've been in my job for 3 years now.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm also struck by parallels because I also sort of fell into this job. I was also a professor and I applied for this job when it came up here and look forward to working there more.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Rabbi Drew, how about you? Can you talk about your spiritual life growing up and your path to the rabbinate and chaplaincy and campus work?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to say about the spirituality piece of it, but I would say Jewish connection for me. And so growing up, we did some stuff Jewishly. We just weren't like super religious. We definitely went to, synagogue a few times a year, did some holiday stuff. For me, really what engaged me further was when I was in high school involved with BBYO, got more involved leadership wise there. And there was this one question that really hit me, which was, would you rather be leaders who are Jews or Jewish leaders? And so for me, I really wanted to see, what does it mean to live Jewishly? How do I live Jewishly? And so that really started me on that trajectory and that path of seeking how to live Jewishly. And then I found it very ameliorative for my life to really embrace my heritage, my identity as living Jewishly. And I wanted to, maybe in college, but definitely by the time I got to rabbinical school, really wanted to help others, just as it helped me by embracing my identity, embracing my heritage, living Jewishly. I wanted to also help share that with other people as well. So I previously spent, as you shared in my bio, over a half decade, 6.5+ years working with young adults, college students in Southern California. And there it was really great. Yes, I did. During the pandemic, I also did my time in a healthcare facility working with seniors, really the most vulnerable population. I did that for a third of a decade, really almost the entirety of the pandemic, serving them. And then I landed where I am presently, although I started here October 2nd of all times. So I'm back to working with young people again, really helping them seek to connect to our heritage.
I have so many questions about your experiences from your work and especially last year. How would you characterize Jewish life? And I guess that's maybe more a question for you, Chaplain Hagar. How would you characterize Jewish life on campus before October 7th? And what was it like post October 7th? And how did you support your students? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. The before and the after. I work on a very interesting campus. It's extremely volatile, and there's always something going on, and there's always a push and a shove happening on two different sides. So, I like to tell people I grew up in this beautiful bubble and never really had anti-Semitism reach me, at least not directly in my face, until I started working in this job. And so that's kind of interesting for me that I call that out in some sense. But I would say that Hillel's done this incredible job of putting these like wellness therapist positions on many of the campuses. And so they were so valuable during COVID because students were not able to get into the mental health facilities as quickly as they wanted. So the Jewish community said, well, we can solve that. We'll create this position. And so that was kind of normalizing this idea of reaching out for mental health. And also from a Jewish context, the majority of students who were seeing me, oh, I feel comfortable talking to you because you're Jewish and you get it. Or can I talk about like my spirituality? And I'm thinking about converting. I've been coming to Hillel for a while. Or conversations around like, I don't feel connected Jewishly right now. Let's talk about that. So the topics were that, and they were also I broke up with my partner and I'm really like having some depression and I'm struggling with this. So we had your variety of pretty much age appropriate things that were coming up. And I would say 90% of the students who came to me were actively involved in Hillel. The way we've always set it up is if you can find me, you can see me. So if sometimes I would see a roommate of somebody who maybe wasn't Jewish, we don't turn anyone away. So I wouldn't say that I've been at Cal when there hasn't been stuff going on. We had a whole year, 2021 to 2022, of things happening at the law school. I won't go into all the details, but we had a lot of demonstrations and trucks driving by with Hitler on them and things that were always kind of happening that kept us on our toes. I think that first year I started receiving hate email too, pretty much anyone who had a Hillel address, but that was the first for me. So I was like, wow, this is intense. And I was really like, oh my gosh, I need to process this. And then we had October and like my processing like was nothing compared to what we were experiencing. My clientele list tripled after October 7th. And I think what was most interesting was I had an infusion of about 18, 19 new clients who were Israeli, who had just finished IDF and came to do university. Welcome. And it was complete and utter triage in those first few weeks. It was saying Kaddish. It was calling their family with me in the room to help them and support them. It was doing therapy in Hebrew. Just things that I hadn't called on it in my bag of tricks as of yet, and was coming up as a necessity. And every single person coming in my office scared, confused, unsure. Should I go home? Should I stay? I'm calling you from home. I left campus. I'm scared. So those were, some of the big changes we were seeing was just this active fear that was taking place and how to help them hold that. I think the other factor that was coming in also was an immense increase in parents reaching out to me going, my young adult is calling me and crying for 2 hours on the phone and I don't know what to say. And so I started doing a series of workshops with International Hillel on how to support parents. I created some material to help parents kind of like answer or also acknowledge that we don't have answers. And sometimes just sitting and letting your loved one cry with you is the best we can do, and acknowledging like, this is new for me too. I'm scared too. So just some examples.
Rabbi Drew, could you talk a little bit about what this year was like for you and your campus?
Sure. So I shared previously, I started October 2nd. So I only had basically the week of Sukkot to get a vague feel of sort of pre-October 7th campus life. That first month, obviously, was not a normal first month on the job, but there I was. I would say like those first couple of months before we went into winter break everybody was in shock. And I think what made it worse is we have an Israeli fellow, a shlicha, and she just happened to be visiting her family for the holidays. And so she was expected to come back after the holidays, but it just kept going and going. She lost a cousin on October 7th. And so she happened to be in Israel. So she attended the funeral. And so she was gone. We were all worried about her and her family. A lot of, like, at first, nobody really knew what to do. We still had Shabbat dinners, but slowly but surely throughout the rest of the semester, even just like Shabbat dinner attendance dwindled. I mean, there was just like this real, not necessarily fear, although maybe that was on the minds of some students, but definitely just like they didn't really know what to do. Thank God we had winter break, and there was like a reset button that was hit during winter break, and students felt, I guess having that restful time was enabled them to reset and return. And we'll see what this year entails. I would say, though, I mean, it definitely came across shocking, not as politically active as a campus as Berkeley, but even just the student government passing these anti-Israel resolutions, the SJP. But I would say, aside from these more headline grabbing news pieces, I think I would say the thing that really characterized that affected the Jewish students the most that I saw was the dissolving of friendships, and whether of close friendships. I remember one student saying she just threw a surprise birthday party like maybe a month or two before and didn't want to speak with her after October 7th. And some of these friendships, really close relationships, dissolved, not necessarily because of arguing over political positions or talking about Israel necessarily. It was just simply that they are Jewish or simply pro-Israel, and that was enough to destroy those relationships. And it was really hard for the Jewish students because this is already, I mean, I think we all lived through this in October, November. It was a really tough time going through it, the feeling of it, and then to not have the support of people we thought, the students, people they thought were their friends, and now they don't even want to hear from them. They don't want to talk to them, was really shocking and jarring. And so those really, really disrupted things, and even not close relationships, even just in other different, I'll use one instance, like engineering. So one girl who was involved with engineering, somehow maybe she talked about Israel at some point, and this other girl she had talked with a lot said, don't talk to me again, don't start up a conversation. So a lot of these things transpired, didn't grab any headlines, but really ruptured a lot of friendships, and a lot of Jewish students didn't know who they could talk to about these things. And so I know that there are other campuses, I've speaking with other Hillel professionals, that they really did seek out Hillel as a refuge after 10/7. We didn't necessarily see that so much, but we definitely saw instances here and there of pockets of Jewish students who definitely felt they didn't have to explain anything when they come to Hillel. Like, they get them, they're also Jewish. So we'll see what happens for this new school year.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I began my position on May 1st, which was the one day my university had an encampment. And literally the first act in my new job was that I went with a team from campus ministry. I'm located in campus ministry. I walked into the encampment and I spoke to the student and I introduced myself as the new campus rabbi. And it was fine. You know, students maybe were not thrilled to see me, but they were polite and they listened and they nodded. And I spent about 2 hours there and I left. And I felt, okay, this is the way I can deal with protest. You know, you can protest, you can disagree, and you can still talk in some sense. And of course, I'm very lucky because I did not go through everything you all went through. What have been some of the positive or maybe more challenging experiences you may have made as you advocated for the Jewish community within the wider university communities? Say anything that sticks out for you.
So this is not a huge story, but it's an instance. Prior to 10/7, there had been this joint LGBTQIA center event for a Rainbow Challah Bake in November. And they were excited about it and promoted materials about it. And then after 10/7, they stopped promoting it. And then as it turned out, when the event actually came around, they had a staff member show up, but none of the students, they adamantly refused to come to Hillel because we are pro-Israel. So it was just fascinating to hear of various groups of students or even just university centers just turning their backs on Hillel. Any potential partnerships that we had been working on, they just said, we don't want to have anything to do with this because Hillel supports Israel. So we'll see how these begin to mend, but that was pretty shocking.
And painful maybe as well.
We have had a lot of that. I think what's most shocking to me was the doubling down, not just, I don't agree with you, but I don't agree with you and I want you to hurt somehow. So that for me, is nothing I had ever seen so intense by people why don't you just talk to me or talk to this other student and hear each other first before you throw the first punch. The violence was really triggering and hard for many students and for me. I had a Hillel sticker on my car. All my windows were broken with a rock that had a swastika on it thrown through the window. That was uncomfortable. Calling work and going, do you have a terrorism line in the budget to repair this? We joke about it, but it's really frightening that people went to violence so quickly. We would try and have Israeli speakers on campus and they'd have to be moved constantly, and 20 minutes before you would be allowed to find out where the speaker would be. We had an incident in February where 200 protesters came and blocked everyone from entering, and they tried to break down the doors, and people were holding the doors, and the speaker had to be escorted out of the building underground through a tunnel. And just 3 Jewish students ended up in the hospital. And so that kind of stuff is really hard to make sense of. I think a lot of students who were sitting with me were like, how can I feel compassion when they're hurting us? And that is a hard question to answer. We had protesters nonstop trying to block access to campus, just using their bodies to make it difficult. And we would come at it from every angle, like, okay, this is a violation of disability rights. You have to move this way, and students just were like, it's too hard. I don't even want to walk on campus. It feels scary. There's so many aspects of the college life I don't think people talk about, like how many students are homeless. I started a closet at Hillel where things are placed and kids can come and take whatever they need. The amount of people that I can't go back to my apartment, they have just said that if I talk about being Jewish or anything about Israel, they're gonna throw all my things out. So there were a lot of instant homeless people who were really trying to figure out where to go. And so much of this is just so painful. So there were these kind of things that as healers, we want to make sense of it and give people tools to manage it. But when you're sitting there with your mouth open going, what is happening? It's difficult. And so I think that was some of the challenges. And I think we like to say going into this fall semester, it's going to be different. The election's really going to take focus. But our encampments were almost immediately, and they were pretty volatile throughout the entire time. And when students tried to approach and talk, it often became violent. So we'll see where we go from here.
This really addresses one of the questions I had here as well. Chaplaincy can be such a gift in conflict. We're trained to see all the emotions and to hold them, including the suffering. And we hope that this will help bring about some healing. And we know it's hard. But of course, as you noted, this perspective is so difficult and not widely held, maybe impossible. And at the same time, if we cannot hear each other's narratives, if we cannot see each other's emotions, we cannot move forward, really. And yet many of us, for so many reasons, we focus on our own suffering. So in this situation, what does it mean for you to be a Jewish chaplain? Has your chaplaincy changed? And if so, how?
I would say my inclination to be a healer and to help is still there. My own I have to do a lot more work on managing my own personal nervous system. And I want to be really honest about managing my own biases and what that feels like. I've had people in my position on other campuses say, oh, I have students who come in and just want to badmouth Israel the whole session, and I get really triggered. I'm like, I haven't necessarily had that. It could very well happen, but for now, most of the people I'm seeing are, for lack of a better, more in line with my thinking. And so I'm Israeli, so it's personal. I had a friend who was held hostage, and I had 2 friends who died at Nova. So it's very personal. And to have students come in and talk to me about it, I really resonate on such a deep level with this scenario of post 10/7. So I think that my chaplaincy has become more vulnerable in some ways. I have to do a much more diligent job of taking care of myself because I get drained much faster and I get sad. And so I need a lot more recovery time than I used to. And that's okay. And I just acknowledge it and make sure that I can bring my nervous system back down after I have these interactions. And even just walking on campus is triggering. So I think acknowledging that and taking care of that is something that's been forefront for me.
And maybe a little more about what you spoke about. And it's a question for both of you, really, but what you addressed right now, Chaplain Hagar, at a time when so much is asked of campus chaplains. How do you take care of your own neshama? You spoke about bringing down your nervous system, but there's so much. How do you take care of your own souls? How do you find the strength and the hope to continue with work when it's very difficult?
I think that part of that thing I talked about before, like resonating with the experience of what some of these students are going through, especially in the beginning when they were like, I stay up all night and talk to family in Israel because that's when they're awake and that's what I can do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reading stories to my cousins on the phone in the middle of the night to try and help them as they're in their safe room. So there was a lot of this connection, this soul connection of like, I really resonate with what you're talking about. And I think that was healing for me to be able to not be alone in that and to be able to be meeting people who really got what I was feeling in that moment, because that I think was so missing for so many people. Like, do you understand how I'm feeling? Like, do you really understand? I heard from so many students that like, being able to speak in Hebrew or being able to talk about Israel freely or your Judaism was really healing for them. And I think it was super healing for me as well. I think in a weird way, doing my job was one of the ways I was taking care of myself. But I think I slept through winter break. I think I literally went to bed and woke up 2 months later. And that was okay, giving myself permission to just be tired and to be exhausted and to take care of myself is super, super important. Lots of pajama days.
How about you, Rabbi Drew?
To be honest, I think for me, connecting, even just, I know this sounds very rabbinic, but just even connecting with like my synagogue community, just feeling that sense of Jewish solidarity, whether it's the need to not needing to explain or not needing to feel under potential attack, just feeling that sense of safety and security, I think was helpful in a general sense for me. On a broader sense, one of the things that I think was also energizing is down as October, as sort of like down, I would say like shell shock we were in October and November, not only in our own selves, but facing just the diminished numbers. So which like, it was my first month or two on the job, and just seeing dwindling attendance at events, Shabbat dinners, etc. It was really kind of down. But I'll give a shout out. One of the speakers at the Hillel Staff Conference in December said, Judaism, like what we do is not just to be here a safety and shield from anti-Semitism, but really to lead with joy. And so I don't think any of us chose the rabbinate or serving as Jewish chaplains to serve the Jewish people just to protect everybody from anti-Semitism. I think we're really here because there is a reason, not just running away from something, but really trying to run toward and provide that sense of joy and a sense of, well, we're actually really here for something. I'll say in a broader sense, even just coming together after 2 months of this, at the very beginning of December with other Hillel staff, there was no campus that was untouched by anti-Semitism. And to come together, and I'm pretty sure there was like a collective sigh of relief of just being in a safe space with hundreds of other Hillel staff members to come together, not just to commiserate, but even just to be like, just let out a collective sigh, regroup. And, we were not in pajamas, as Hagar was mentioning, but I think to some degree, there's a sense of December was really good to reset. So, or winter more broadly. So that was definitely helpful, especially moving on into the spring semester.
I hear a lot of sort of focusing on Jewish identity or on aspects of Jewish identity that give each of you hope. And I wanted to bring in another aspect. In June, I co-taught a week-long seminar of future faith leaders at the Institute for Islam, Judaism, and Christianity in Baltimore. And we, of course, hesitated if this was a good time to have this. A lot of participants didn't want to come. We were really nervous about it. But in the end, we said that, this was the time to have the seminar. So we did. And there was a moment when we had a Israel-Palestine conversation, and we set it up in a way that people submitted questions they had anonymously, and we put them up on the wall. And people had a little 2-minute cube, and whoever wanted to answer a question could get up and could respond, and then somebody else could get up. And it was a way to bring up opinions and emotions that were in the room already. It was very hard. It was 2 hours. It was really, really hard. And, there were tears. And then something really interesting happened. A day later, students brought up other difficult conversations. So topics that always come up in these contexts, talking about the divinity of Jesus, or why don't Jews believe in Jesus, or how about the Trinity? But usually it's faculty who bring them up. And this time it was students. So when a student said, oh, why don't you Jews believe in Jesus? And one of the Jewish students said, when you say this is what I hear, and this is what comes up for me. And it happened a few times, and I kept thinking about why that was. And I think it was because we'd had this really difficult conversation that obviously didn't solve anything, but that opened our hearts a little bit in a very small, protected environment. But ever since, I've thought about how and if it is possible to harness this experience of having a difficult conversation in a very protected environment. But if it's possible to have this at universities as well, I don't know. I listened to your experiences, Chaplain Hagar, and it may not be possible right now there. But I also feel that in the end, they have to happen, these conversations. I wonder what your ideas are.
I love that question. And I think, it's funny, I was saying to someone the other day about I've been angry for so long, and now I feel like there's some of the like either exhaustion or it's out of my system a little bit, and I'm ready to like bring in some more tools for myself. I'm actually going to be part of a fellowship cohort at the I Center in doing conflicts of interest, learning to speak about Israeli-Palestinian topics, and I think it's going to be really good for me to do that. I think also in my work with International Hillel, I was invited to go to Israel this summer and really kind of focus on supporting students who were brave enough to go. We normally have 1,800 students. I think we had 350, and really acknowledging their bravery for going and participating with a agenda that was changing daily. Going to Nova, going to Hostage Square, getting to do these things, and also having the job of being able to create curriculum and ideas around how to process this and what are we looking at and how are we supporting students. We learned a lot about that. One of the things I think that was the biggest takeaway was we were focused on the students. There was so much Israeli staff that really needed to process with me and tell me things. I remember I got there and within hours, one of the guides had taken me aside and said, I want you to know that I had tickets to Nova and we couldn't find anyone to watch the dog. And so we didn't go. But all my friends called me when it was going on and I don't sleep anymore. And we did some really amazing work together that week to move through or to support tools in that area. I think that it was, for me, a great experience to have the conversation about how are we holding both sides here? And what does this look like? It's funny because when I was in Israel, I was like, oh, this is the safest I've ever felt. This feels so good. I feel like my nervous system is completely calmed down. And that was just about being amongst people. You didn't have to explain your Judaism or who you were or why you were there, which was a really nice respite for me at that point. Yeah, like you said, definitely, I believe that these conversations need to start happening in a way that is mindful and respectful. When is that time going to happen for our campus? I think it's happening slowly in some places. We have an amazing rabbi at our Hillel who is trying to host just smaller groups of people talking, and that's taking us in the right direction.
Rabbi Drew, how about on your campus or from your experience?
I specifically came to Cincinnati because it's less politically active. Yeah, it's a public university, but it's not that politically active. And I know there are students who specifically chose to come here. Rather, if they there was one Cleveland student who said, I could have gone to Ohio State. That's a much more politically active campus. To be honest, I really haven't had much broader interaction. Literally the only time was there was one event where normally the Interfaith Center takes part in, so I was there and I happened to meet some people who were doing some chaplains ministry work. Really, the Hillel director is the one. Our executive director really interfaces with the administration, not me.
I'm struck by these different structures. I am in campus ministry. I am paid by the university, and I am very much part of the university. So I am meeting every dean under the sun with everybody. When I walked into the encampment my first day, I didn't notice this, but there was the entire sort of senior leadership of the university around. They all saw me, and they all think I walk on water. And I said, this is what you hired me for. I said, you hired a chaplain, and I said, I wasn't afraid for my life. I mean, my colleagues went in there. They knew the students. All right. Since the chaotic end of the semester, the war in Gaza has, of course, continued, and then fighting in the north and elsewhere have escalated. There's no clear end in sight. Some students at some universities have already announced a hot fall and a continuation of protests and encampments. What would you tell yourself and your campus community, many of whom are weary and exhausted, maybe still are, as they get ready for the upcoming academic year? Rabbi Drew.
I'm really hopeful that just as the winter was a nice reset, summer as well. I also know that this is not going to be a surprise, whereas October, November was a massive surprise. I mean, literally for everybody, but definitely for the Jewish students on campuses. This is something that I think students are well aware of that they're coming into, even freshmen that have never experienced campus. And I almost wonder if what they're reading about, what types of content they're consuming as they prepare to enter a college campus for the first time. So I don't think this will blindside anybody. I also don't know really what to expect if there's going to be, like you mentioned, the protests. I will say one thing, which is the encampments. We were very lucky, partially because we're not that politically active of a campus at University of Cincinnati, but also the final day of finals was April 26th. So that was like classes had finished before the encampments really, took like wildfire across the campus, the country. So we were, thank God, very lucky in that account. But who knows if they'll set up shop here for the fall. We really don't know. I'm not good at telling the future, but I'm also hopeful that it won't be terribly. Well, it won't be terrible and won't be terribly surprising, whatever does come our way.
I must say, when I think of encampments on my campus, I think that the encampment itself is not the problem. The problem is the kind of discourse that we're having and how it is expressed. And that's what I would like to see shift. Chaplain Hagar, what would you tell your community or yourself?
Well, I know that I've had a really long conversation with myself this summer about what I would assume the majority of us as healers gave last year is not going to work this year. Like, I can't personally put that much of myself into everything the way I did, or there won't be much of me left. So I know that I have to be really aware of how I'm caring for myself, how I'm caring for others, and honestly, what I'm capable of, and be okay with that. So that's part of my learning. I would say, that I think at Cal, it's always be prepared. There's going to be something, there's always something to be angry about, which is really, it's beautiful that these young adults want to express themselves. Ideally, it'd be great if we could do it in a format that is not violent or angry, but I think that we're definitely going to see stuff happening. I think the election is going to push the agenda. I personally think about October 7th, the date being an issue. It's hard to imagine, but I'm pretty darn sure there's going to be some things going on. And, I always get surprised at Cal, like, wow, okay, I knew something was coming, but I didn't think it was going to be that. So I give a lot of props for creativity sometimes. I think it's about just expecting the unexpected. And one of the things I'm doing this week is I'm working with our Hillel staff. We're going to do some role play around how to talk about these difficult topics, how to bring them up, how to put boundaries around them, and how to help staff interact with students who are struggling. Wish us all luck.
We will. We are nearing the end of our time here at NeshamaCast, but before we close, is there anything you would like to add?
Sure. So this is a very local situation. I'll say two things regarding the administration, which is the first of which is the really lovely thing, very surprising, is that first Friday following October 7th, the president of the university came to Hillel and addressed and wanted to hear from the students, which was really lovely. The other thing is we got invited to be part of the Campus Climate Initiative, which I'm very glad that that the administration is working on this and is trying to process it, trying to figure it out. At the same time, there's only so much they can do in a public university as far as free speech and other such situations. So there are definitely positive signs. I'm looking at this with optimistic glasses on. So we'll see what the new year brings. I'm going to throw in one other thing that somehow did not come up, which was social media. So I will say this, a lot of our students read, I read social media too, but a lot of their friends, they would look at Instagram stories or posts, but a lot of stories, and some of that also frayed some of their social interactions as well. I can't believe my friend would post such and such, or da da da. And sometimes it was even if they were in a sorority and they couldn't believe their fellow sorority sister was posting such things. So that was another way that really just sort of frayed the social connections here on campus.
Yeah, I echo what Drew said. There are some avenues that are positive. We have a coalition against anti-Semitism on campus now. We have a new dean. I do feel the administration learned a lot from last year, and there's a lot of things that people want to do differently. And I feel hopeful about that. And I feel hopeful that, Hillel's going to continue to be this safe place to come and have time with other students who want to feel some neshama, some spirit in this. So I think that is what I really want to enter this with, focusing on the positive.
On my campus, I was hired at the same time as an imam was hired. And I think the two of us have a tremendous advantage that we both started sort of a year in. There are a lot of opportunities here that we plan to take advantage of, a lot of collaboration that we hope to have, a lot of modeling we hope to have on conversations where we may not agree, but we can still have conversations, a lot of hopefully shared celebrations and all that, and we'll see what happens. I'm also hopeful for myself, for my campus. And I listen to what people tell me around me. I listen to their anxieties and their fears, and I try to hold them and to say, we're here. It's okay. Chaplain Hagar, Rabbi Drew, I want to thank both of you for joining us on the NeshamaCast. Your service is a blessing to all of us, and especially, of course, to our students and their families. I pray that you will be blessed with good health and strength as you return to campus now to continue your sacred work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
NeshamaCast is a production of Neshama, Association of Jewish Chaplains. Thank you to our guests, Chaplain Hagar Ben Eliezer and Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and NeshamaCast contributor Rabbi Katya Philo. Check our show notes for more information about all three participants. Please consider making a contribution to NAJC to support NeshamaCast and all of the vital work that NAJC does to promote Jewish spiritual care. Just click on the link in the show notes to donate. Thank you to Rabbi Katya Philo for technical support and production assistance. Additional thanks for logistical support to Allison Atterbury, NAJC Acting Executive Director, and Rabbi Drew Kaplan and the NAJC Social Media Committee. Transcripts for this episode and other episodes of NeshamaCast are available at neshamacast.simplecast.com and are typically posted 1 week after the episode first airs. Our theme music is a Niggun for Ki Anu Amecha, written and performed by Reb-Cantor Lisa Levine. Please help others find the show by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. We welcome comments and suggestions for future programming at neshamacast@gmail.com. And be sure to follow NAJC on Facebook to learn more about Jewish spiritual care happening in our communities. May we all work together to heal our world.
I would say that people have come to me through the community, tons, because I'm in the Jewish community. People know me. What can we do? How do we support students? How do we help right now? And, sometimes it's down to just bake some cookies and bring them by to staff. They'd love that. Or make a donation or host some kids at one of your seders.